Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, since the budget, we've seen quite clearly that it's not only Labor that opposes the government's unfair, short-sighted higher education package. In fact, Australians across the country oppose the measures in the previous bill and those in this bill. And I would indicate that, based on the Prime Minister's assessment, it's been, since the election, a period of fairly poor government, so bad that they had to consider restarting and having a new opportunity to get good government right at the beginning of this week. So I would suggest one way to achieve that might be just to pull this bill, because it is not well supported and it should be opposed. We see Australians in particular are concerned about the public funding cut to undergraduate courses of up to 37%. We see the Australian public in particular oppose the potential for $100,000 degrees that are the result of combining both cuts and fee deregulation. We know that all Australians want the right to pursue their education at Australia's best universities without facing a crippling lifetime debt. In this world, as many speakers have said, of constant change, of rapid industry transformation, many people will need to return to higher education. So we're not only talking about school leavers seeking their first qualifications, we're talking about many Australians who may already have a university qualification, need to upgrade it, to change it. We're talking about people who may have gone through vocational training and seek to get higher level qualifications. In a modern world, a lifetime of education and training faces us. And so this is a matter for all Australians. Our university and the education they provide is a national asset. It's a national investment. While it provides individual benefit to the students, it is also significant in providing a contribution to the public good of the nation, both economically and socially. Our universities are deeply engaged in significant and important research, particularly much of a global endeavour. And I just want to give the House an example from my own backyard, Wollongong University's Global Challenges program. If you go to their website, you can see a description of it and understand how significant and contemporary it is. That particular program is described on that website. Over the coming decades, we will face many challenges and transformations in the way we live. The University of Wollongong Global Challenges program recognises the interconnected nature of these transformations. The program is designed to encourage and develop creative and community-engaged research that will help drive social, economic and cultural change in our region, and it will be translatable across the globe. The program will initially focus on 3 global challenges: living well longer, manufacturing innovation and sustaining coastal and marine zones. These are united by an overall research goal: transforming lives and regions. Each global challenge involves collaboration between University of Wollongong researchers and business, government, community and other research organisations. Global challenges will articulate and pursue innovative solutions to major challenges, with a clear focus on the delivery and adoption of research outputs that have maximum impact in key areas of social, economic and community need. And that's only one example of the important work that my own university is doing, and I know those who have universities across the country see the same thing. So Australians understand that both the research and the teaching that happens in our universities are important. Yet Minister Pyne continues to hold hostage the funding for research and future fellowships for mid-career researchers, and he continues to ransom vital funding for research infrastructure. So what do we have before us in legislation Mark II? Well, we have another proposal that is still wrong for the nation, it's still wrong for students, and it's still wrong for families. The government has given up to $3.5 billion of its $3.9 billion of savings up, but it's not fixed the inequity that was at the heart of the original bill and caused our major worry. the bill still contains $1.9 billion in cuts to Australian universities. It still contains $100,000 degrees for undergraduate students. It still contains $171 million in cuts to equity programs. It still contains $200 million in cuts to indexation of grants programs. It also contains $170 million in cuts to research training. It introduces fees for PhD students for the first time ever and includes $80 million in cuts to the Australian Research Council. The massive cuts to universities remain. The new fee imposts for students remain. Nothing of substance has changed, and Labor's position remains unchanged in opposition to it. Despite speculation in recent weeks that the government would give up its budget savings to achieve its ideological goals, this bill still includes the massive funding cuts that were proposed in the budget. It slashes funding for Commonwealth-supported places in undergraduate degrees by an average 20%, and for some courses up to 37%. And it cuts indexation for university funding, costing universities $202 million over the forward estimates period. These are all matters that were not considered or discussed with the community before the election. In fact, the minister, then the shadow minister, said exactly the opposite. He indicated before the election to the Australian people that there were no proposed changes to the way universities were funded under consideration by them if they took government. And this underpins why the package is in so much trouble with the community. There was no discussion, there was no consideration of why these sorts of changes might have been required, how they might have been achieved, what the general population thought about them before the election. There was no mandate for this government to proceed in the direction that it has. And quite rightly, people have had a look at it and said it's unfair, like so much of the budget. The whole reform package is about making those who can least afford carry the weight of the government's unfair budget. In particular, this bill now includes a transition fund of $100 million over 3 years for regional universities. $100 million over 3 years. The fact that the government even needs to propose a fund indicates that all the concerns we raised about the impact on regional universities in the first bill were actually real and accurate. There is no need for transition funds when measures are fair and reasonable. There would be no need for scholarships, indeed, if the system and the fees it introduced were equitable. The day the original bill was defeated in the Senate, the Minister told Universities Australia this transition fund would be $300 million. That's still $200 million short of what the universities were seeking, I should point out. So we end up with a measly $100 million in this bill, 1/5 of the size the sector itself thinks is needed to allow for adjustment to deregulation. Last week I attended a forum organised by the member for Indi, Cathy McGowan, and we heard compelling evidence from one of the very regions that will be affected about how important regional universities are to the broader economic and social well-being of their region. These universities are major direct employers and significant providers of education for critical regional sectors such as health services. I know this directly and personally through our experiences in the Illawarra region, particularly as we've been undergoing significant structural transformation in recent decades. The role of Wollongong University in supporting the research and education effort to assist that process has been integral to the success of growing new employment and transforming existing industry sectors to sustain jobs. The university is also now one of the largest employers, whereas once BlueScope was the largest employer, it's now been superseded by the university as a direct employer, and therefore is a significant direct economic driver in the region as well. I'd also like to identify in this context that the local TAFE Institute is also a critical partner in this task and has provided important skills and training expertise and service, particularly for many restructured employees. This case was in particular outlined in the report of the House of Representatives Education and Employment Committee, TAFE and Australian Asset. I note the government has not yet responded to the committee's report, and I'd like to encourage the new minister to look seriously at the work and the bipartisan recommendations of that report. But in support of this critical public sector work of universities, it seems a pathetic one-off $100 million over 3 years is the best that the Liberal and National Party can do for regional Australia. The other persistent issue that causes us to oppose these bills in their new variation is the evidence that there will be $100,000 degrees out of this package. All of the analysis and the Group of 8 to the National Tertiary Education Union agrees that student fees would need to go up by around 30% just to make up for the initial funding cut by this government. For some degrees, that figure is 60%. But of course, this legislation would implement complete deregulation of student fees from the 1st of January 2016. Unis can charge whatever they like. The University of Western Australia has already said it will charge all students $16,000 a year, more than doubling the cost of an arts degree overnight. And I could point out to the House that there is nowhere in the world that deregulation led to price competition and lower fees for students. In the UK, where they were deregulated in 2012 with a cap of £9,000, for the 2015-16 academic year, there will be 2 universities, 2 out of 123, that will not be charging the cap. That is the maximum amount that they can charge. It should be pointed out that in the Australian context, the current student contribution rate is already a maximum rate. It's a maximum rate because the Howard government partially deregulated student contributions to allow universities to charge anything from naught to the maximum, to the cap. No surprises at the time that Dr Nelson, as the minister said, some institutions may increase the tuition fees in some disciplines. Some institutions have already indicated they'd like to reduce their fees or make no change at all. So what actually happened? None of them have decreased their university fees. The cap is treated, the maximum is treated as the standard cost. Even without having a 20% funding cut to contend with, every single university put its student contributions up to the maximum almost immediately. So the evidence is there to see, not only internationally, but here in our own history. So I particularly want to just finish up by talking about my concerns about the entrance of private providers and overseas universities under this legislation's proposal to extend access to per-student subsidies at 70% of the rate for public universities. I think we need to be really conscious that there is a very real danger of poor quality and low-cost providers aggressively entering the sector to take financial advantage of the new market. While, of course, many private providers have a long and quality record in the sector, and clearly not all private providers or overseas institutions will go down the cheap and nasty path, enough doing so will replicate the real and serious issues that have emerged in the vocational education sector. The bill proposes, and I think Parliament must make particular note, of the increasing evidence, the reports before the Parliament propose, and the Parliament should note the increasing evidence of dodgy providers entering our vocational education system, taking advantage of vulnerable students by signing them up to inappropriate courses which they never complete but still end up with a vet fee help debt. Along with Shadow Minister Kim Carr, I'm pleased that our request to the Auditor-General to investigate potential abuses of vet fee help has been accepted. But until many of these very real issues in the vocational sector are fully understood and effective responses being put in place, we should not take the risk with the quality of our higher education system, our 4th largest export earner. Finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, I think that we have to indicate that the bill before us, while amended, has not actually addressed the underlying unfairness, the underlying danger to the participation and the economic capacity of our universities, in particular to deliver for our regions, and that on that basis it should be rejected and the government should start good government today by pulling it from the list.
I thank the